Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Navneet Graywal. I'm a board member of Housing California, as well as an attorney with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. So I'm really honored today to introduce our first speaker, Senator Holly Mitchell. She has a cheering section on the left. Senator Mitchell has virtually been committed to public service for her entire life, beginning with volunteering for a congressional campaign when she was still in elementary school. Now she represents one of the most diverse swaths of the city of Los Angeles as their state senator. In between those two ventures, she's done a few things, and those things have primarily related to being a voice on behalf of and with Black and brown women and children, and ensuring that those folks have access to the vital tools and resources they need in order to live full and complete lives. So just as some examples of the work that she's done, when she was a legislative advocate at the Western Center on Law and Poverty, Senator Mitchell, or then not senator, helped develop the Healthy Families Program, which ensures low-cost insurance for children who are not eligible for Medi-Cal. Later, Senator Mitchell became the executive director of both the Los Angeles Black Women's Health Project, as well as Crystal Stairs, which is the state's largest nonprofit advocating on issues related to child care and child development. As a state senator and as an assemblywoman, Senator Mitchell has an impressive track record on legislation that improves access for families living in poverty to Medicare, Medi-Cal, CalWORKS, and CalFresh. And the reason we've invited Senator Mitchell here today is that she is also focusing especially on eliminating homelessness. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Senator Holly Mitchell today.
I appreciate, that's a lot of you, jeez. I appreciate that, and I hate these big sonic boom. I appreciate the introduction, primarily because it gave me a minute to catch my breath, because we just ran in from Labor Committee, where I'm gonna have to run back out to go take some votes. So I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciated the introduction. And I appreciate you having me here to talk about your work, to talk about my work, and to talk about how we have to continue to work together on behalf of all of California. And I want to thank you all for coming to Sacramento. This is your place, that is your building across the street, and I hope you know that, and I hope you have a sense of ownership, because my colleagues and I work for you and the people you represent, and you need to own that place as the people's house to make sure that we are developing policies that work for you. I mean that. Just yesterday, I had the opportunity in my office to meet with several folks who were here for the conference in my office. And they talked to me about many of the issues that many of you see on the ground in your own communities. And we all know the statistics. Our state has the highest number of homeless residents in the nation. Our state has the highest number of children living in poverty in the nation. We have, some estimates suggest, over 120,000 Californians who are sleeping on our streets, cars, or shelters on any given night in the 7th largest economy in the world. We have the highest number of homeless families, homeless children, and homeless and unaccompanied minors who, again, have no place of their own. And so just yesterday, as I was speaking to my girl, Teresa, as I met Juan King, as the women of the Downtown Women's Center tell me on a regular basis, our homeless communities face the reality of the night in ways that many of us have never had to consider. issues around sanitation, issues with cold, issues around safety, being too tired to seek appropriate housing or medical treatment, being exposed to more crime during the night than any of us could fathom. That conversation and many others I've had in the legislative halls in the last several weeks also made me think about my own family, quite frankly. I had a great aunt who was the first of the 4 girls of my grandmother being her sister, to go to college in Arizona, mind you, in the early 40s. She was the first African-American teacher to integrate the Phoenix public school system as a teacher. She had 2 sisters, my grandmother being one of them, who were young, unwed mothers. My grandmother had my mom at 17 in Los Angeles. And she watched her sisters, her older sisters, move from place to place with these 2 young children and just really didn't have a sense of stability in Los Angeles. While my grandmother and my other great aunt, my Aunt Marion, were always employed, finding housing that was suitable for them and their young children was challenging. Los Angeles had the housing ordinance back in those days where black folks didn't live west of Arlington. And so this great aunt, the school teacher, who was unmarried, childless, decided that she would buy a house for her sisters to raise their kids. Her father was Pima Indian. I often asked my great-grandmother, how did you find him? She said, well, poor people lived on the same side of town. The reservation was here, poor black folks lived across the street, and we met at a dance. And so they had always been renters. And so great aunt decided she would buy a house to provide her sisters with these young kids some stability, and she did. And that became, on my mother's side of the family, kind of the first family home on the corner of 39th and Budlong in South Los Angeles. And from there, my mother was able to find some stability at Carver Junior High and Jefferson High School, and ultimately USC in the mid to late 50s. But what that act of courage on behalf of my Aunt Kathleen meant to my family, dominated by women. She talked to me once I became an adult about trying to make that $100 a month mortgage. Can you imagine? She herself didn't live in that house until she retired after teaching 40 years in the Phoenix public school system. And we moved her from Phoenix to that house, 39th and Budlong. But I recognize what that sense of stability and ownership meant as a foundation for my family. The example she set for me to buy my first home before I was 30, to understand what not only having a place of your own, but what ownership means. And you, as Housing California, are really looking at the spectrum. That while I'm focusing currently on issues impacting our homeless brothers and sisters in California, it's the entire spectrum of housing issues that we all have to embrace and confront and figure out what kind of California we want to live in, what kind of California we want our great Aunt Kathleen's to grow old in and our children to be born and raised in. Is it a California of communities with affordable housing, where people can plant roots deep and raise families and have parks and high-performing schools in their communities? Or is it a California laced with tiny house communities and tent communities and skid rows like I represent in downtown LA? We, all of us, not just me as a legislator or you as housing advocates, but we as residents of this state have to figure out and come together to talk about what kind of California we choose to live in. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to present my bill, SB 1380, before our first policy committee, Human Services. And the bill will clarify that California will become a housing first state and establish the California Homeless Coordinating Council, requiring that departments administering state programs targeted to end homelessness collaborate with the Coordinating Council to incorporate the core components of permanent supportive housing as a housing first model in this state. And while I was presenting the bill, we had questions from one of my colleagues who perceives the housing first model as a model that limits options versus gives options. And so it reminded me, and I told my witnesses that that's just an indication of the fact that we have work to do. We have work to do to educate our friends and neighbors and your state policymakers about what all the research is telling us about what fundamentally works. And what does that research say? That the best way to end homelessness is to provide affordable housing first that includes critical support services. It's not just the roof, it's all that goes in to make sure that you're successful in maintaining that roof. Unfortunately, some still don't seem to have kept up with this current research and don't seem to understand what Ms. Loving from Santa Clara County said beautifully in committee yesterday, that what our goal must be is brief, rare, and non-reoccurring homelessness. The simplicity of it was just beautiful. I am clear that at every level, from our local shelters to our county health departments, how much funding government is spending on this issue of homelessness. But what I'm also clear about is what she said also yesterday, that we have got to transition government funding from managing homelessness to ending it. And that, I have to say, is my personal goal and quest. In January, along with President Pro Tem Kevin De Leon, I joined with many other colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly in announcing our plan to adopt the Housing First model and to talk about how we, again, provide state funding to this end. You've heard about our quest to repurpose some of the mental health ballot initiative, the proposition dollars, to this effort. And I'm hoping we can count on your support, your collective advocacy and energy as we go through the budget process to accomplish that goal. As a result of that effort, I recently was sent on a field trip, if you will. I led the official Senate delegation to the great state of Utah to look at their example as a state in identifying housing first as their primary goal and what they've done to significantly reduce chronic homelessness in their entire state. And what struck me was not that it's a unique model. There are municipalities and county governments across this state who are running amazingly innovative programs. But what struck me about my experience in Utah was, I have to say, as a policymaker, as a former lobbyist with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, as former staff, I don't know that I've ever seen in practice a time when all levels of government were on the exact same page about a public policy issue. I met with members of the state legislature from both parties. I met with county leaders from both parties and their local elected officials from the city of Salt Lake. And it was as if they were all reading from the same script. They were clear that they had identified a shared goal, a vision, if you will, that leads their policy efforts and their funding efforts. That's why, over a 10-year period of time, they've reduced chronic homelessness in their state by 90%. Now, I'm not confused. I'm a third-generation native Angelino. I know the difference in size between Utah and California. Trust me. However, To them, their numbers felt as overwhelming as our homeless numbers feel to us. And what they learned over their 10-year period of time, and what fuels their ability to all three levels of government to speak from the same script today, is they came together, they had peaks and valleys in the early years of their experience, but they've seen the progress. So when you speak to business leaders in Salt Lake City, when you speak to philanthropy in Salt Lake City, when you speak to the homeless advocates in Salt Lake City, they feel that together they've accomplished a goal. And while that may sound very sophomoric, it has worked. And it puts them in a solid position and place to be able to launch their next big initiative, which they're embarking upon now. Well, that also gave me the motivation to come back to my great state to talk about what we could model at the state level. Like I said, organizations like Housing California, cities and counties are doing your thing. It's the state of California that's been missing from this critical conversation, and I aim to change that. So I need your help. I need your help in demanding more from all of us, that we work together to create a statewide system for housing, a system that, again, makes our homeless brothers and sisters a priority with a shared vision. So SB 1380 poses that we cannot bring an end to homelessness in California without a committed state response to end it, one that requires consistent focus and continual collaboration between all levels of government, private sector, philanthropy, really all of us. So in short, the bill creates the California Homeless Coordinating Council, which will oversee implementation of Housing First in California. It mandates that departments administering state programs work with the California Coordinating Council to adopt Housing First guidelines and regulations by the summer of 2019. You know how legislation goes. The bill identifies a number of whereases and therefores, but the ultimate goal is to make sure that the directors and heads of all state departments come together and frame a vision statement for the state of California. The Pro Tem and I met with the director of Caltrans a number of weeks ago, and I showed him the LA Times article from the day after Christmas that showed tent cities over every freeway overpass and on-ramp across the state. And perhaps appropriately, he restated to me the mission of Caltrans, to which I responded, I appreciate that's your mission, but fundamentally today, you're functioning as a landlord. When I drive from my district to the airport to come back to Sacramento every week, and I drive on the Harbor Freeway, every overpass between downtown and the transition to the 105, I see whole communities that have set up shop and established on property that he owns and manages. From where I come from, that makes him a landlord. And so my hope with developing the Coordinating Council is to bring state departments with mission statements and areas of focus that may not focus exclusively on homeless to the table, so we all collectively understand that we as a state are experiencing a natural disaster. It's not just Skid Row in downtown LA. There are homeless people in every community across this entire state. And what does government do when we experience a natural disaster? We sound an alarm, and everybody comes to the table to talk about what we do collectively to solve it. And that is my hope will be the ultimate goal of the Coordinating Council. I also believe that we have to think long-term about our state's ability to respond to and fund programs that help our communities. In that vein, last year I joined with my colleague, Senator Lonnie Hancock, and we introduced SCA, Senate Concurrent Amendment 5, State Constitutional Amendment 5, SCA 5. And what that was about was basically the third rail in politics in California, Prop 13. The focus of SCA 5 would be to finally make our property tax code fair by assessing commercial and industrial properties at their fair market value after a phase-in period. Our goal with SCA 5 was to also provide tax relief for businesses, protect homeowners and renters from any changes to their property tax status, and create strict accountability measures for new revenues. I believe we have to make our tax system more fair so that businesses are contributing their fair share into our state's general fund so that we have more flexibility to help our most vulnerable communities. From my perspective, it was a very basic, fundamental goal. I was not voting age when Prop 13 passed, but I certainly remember the conversations around our dinner table, and it was fear that Great Aunt Kathleen wouldn't be able to afford the property tax on her house. There was no conversations around our dinner table about making sure that Disneyland and other large privately owned corporate landowners would have the same kind of protection and not have their property valued fairly and according to market. So that's the goal of SCA 5, and we hope that you'll continue to track it as we move that through the process. So in closing, I would just say, together, I believe we can do this. I believe we can do this. And on behalf of Teresa and Juan King and Great Aunt Kathleen, the women of the Downtown Women's Center, I hope you too believe we can do this. It's about us all coming together, identifying priorities, recognizing that California is the great state we all choose to call home, and let's make it livable, affordable, viable, and humane for all of California's residents. I congratulate you on your convening. I challenge you to keep doing the hard work that you've done as an organization housing California. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you back at the Capitol in the trenches. Thank you so much.